One of the all-time greatest science fiction films ever made. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, it's not. The strange roller derby, roller lacrosse, dystopian future, moisture lacking future. No less than Charles During, Sarah Douglas, Jamie Gertz, Lucas Haas, Jason Patrick. This is 1986 Solarbabies. What can I possibly say about Solarbabies? It popped up on my news feed on social media through a retro 80s site. I had never even heard of it. Apparently, it was released at the same time as Star Trek IV, and this film being sort of notoriously roasted by critics for being dumb and irrational and a whole slew of other terrible labels. It never became a phenomenon enough. Me, as a Star Trekker, was not even aware that this film ever existed because it didn't do so well. So I hear about this and then I check it on Amazon Prime, and sure enough, it is included with Prime, so I watched it. Now, it is alleged online that Solarbabies has a cult following that loves it, and I'm actually not surprised. The movie certainly is sort of goofy, over the top, sort of silly, especially by today's standards. I mean, I think it was at the time, but it certainly did not hold up well, as we would say. But at the same time, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff in it. So when we meet our infamous Solarbabies, they are apparently a roller hockey, roller lacrosse, a mixed combined sport of the future team. They live in an orphanage. We don't see a lot of very young children, but we're told that babies are being taken away from people and relocated here. It's not an orphanage. We get the idea in the sense that we think of one. Rather, it's a relocation center where children taken away from their parents are being raised. There's a new E-state, and there is an E-police department, and there's an E, but these are not E in the sense of the internet era and electronic. It is eco. It is related to the environment. And what we find in this distant future year that we're only told is 41, in the year of 41, past whatever cataclysm, what's left of the human race lives in these little settlements. There are orphanages that selectively save to raise proper humans that will live within the protectorate, within the area where continually purified water is maintained enough for a certain population to survive. We get, basically it is a dystopian post-apocalyptic future, but there's some sense that there is freedom. There are settlements outside the protectorate. There is a minimal amount of water, and the protectorate seems to be interested in using the emergency, using the institutions they've constructed for the lack of water to actually reinforce a continual tyranny that disconnects parents from their children to raise them to be part of the authoritarian state. There is also in the background of this, then, there are those old eco-warriors, the ones that resisted the protectorate's takeover. We're not exactly sure at the beginning where they are, but we will meet their descendants who have found an oasis living underground where a glacier is constantly melting. They have water, and they have more or less decided to stay there, teach their children generation after generation, and hopefully overpower the protectorate in the future, not by overpowering them, not through military force, but to simply rebuild human civilization. We also have in the midst of this a sphere, a really cool sphere with the name Bodhi, which is said to be from outer space, but also said to be the sphere of Longinus, not Longinus. I thought it was a mispronunciation of the old Latin name, but at least according to the subtitles, it is not. But we don't really hear much about the genius Longinus or how he would have built it or why it would have been in space. And by the end of the film, we get the idea that Bodhi is an extraterrestrial intelligence. It is a sphere. It appears to be alive. It is certainly intelligent. It is discovered by the littlest of the boys on the Solarbaby team or squad or clique. in a cave, and Bodai is alive. It communicates. It miraculously gives him his hearing back, which is a bizarre, hilarious scene because the boy was deaf, but he suddenly just starts yelling to hear his own echo. And it's like, yeah, nothing about this indicates the kid was really deaf, but maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he always wasn't, but we never get that. Bodai does crazy things like make it rain indoors. There's Bodai appears to be the Infinity Stones of a much earlier era of MacGuffins, and yet it's not only about him. There's also this other group, and you're waiting for the eco people that live out there like hippies, waiting to rebuild civilization. They must have something to do with this Longinus guy, and they built the sphere, and they've been looking for it, but no, that had nothing to do with that. There are also tribes of people called Chingas. I'm going to forget now. Chinganas that up for random multiracial leftovers of civilization that don't live with the eco people where there is water, but they eke out an existence in various villages. And the one we see apparently is built on a former amusement park, although that seems really weird because some of the amusements involved hanging mannequins like in the Old West as though you were executing them because that's so amusing, or was at one time. These people dress and behave vaguely Native American, though they are not. They talk to birds and have magic and other weird things that are sort of vaguely old Hollywood version of Native Americans, and yet they're not, and no real explanation is given. We do know that the Protectorate, the Strictor, these are great titles. They have tutors, they have strictors. The strictor who's in charge of tracking down our renegade solar babies and recovering the sphere. He plots with an evil director of a water purification plant of how they're going to destroy the sphere. As Sarah Douglas's character says, you found that malignant thing. The thing that might, like give us water back, because it's far more important to build your tyranny and maintain your power than allow people to live. The water treatment plant is sort of a fascinating work of special effects. It conveniently has no steps. It has a ton of ramps, which works out really well since our protagonists love to roller skate everywhere, and the bad guys roller skate everywhere, and everybody sort of roller skates, and they're able to roller skate in the end. And of course, who could forget one of the greatest sci-fi robots of all time, Terminac, a robot programmed by the Protectorate just to destroy things. They boast that it can drill through anything with force, and it can also really subtly pluck the eye out of a living bird, and it's been programmed to enjoy it. Why exactly you built this? What? It's all, I don't even know. So ultimately, Terminac fails to Terminac the sphere. Our solar babies roller skate in and save the day, complete with bizarre, futuristic intended jargon that sounds more like 80s skateboarder jargon, and young dudes with dangly earrings that look just like they came from 1986. In the end, Bodai, our miraculous ball from the heavens, is rescued, and he apparently is an extraterrestrial. He leaves a little bit of himself behind in the children, even as he shows them their first thundercloud that they have ever seen, and he does something to the atmosphere as he's leaving that causes the water to return. Certainly would have been within the intentions of the genius prophesied Longinus, except that's all we know about him, and we have no idea what role he played in any of this by the end of the film. But we do see the children happily swimming in what appears to be a vast ocean now that the world has been healed. There is, overall, with Solarbabies, there's a sort of a pre-Total Recall sort of vibe, like that idea in that film, particularly different than the novel by Philip K. Dick. But in that film, Total Recall, that the Martian tyranny wants to control the air, and they don't want the atmosphere to be restored, so they hide the alien machine. Though that film comes later and is highly different than the novel, it almost makes you wonder if they like saw Solarbabies and were like, this is a nice idea in a crappy movie, so let's go ahead and steal this. But it's a similar sort of vein. The tyranny uses the emergency as a reason to establish the tyranny. They don't want the tyranny to end, therefore they need to keep water supplies short in order to maintain their power and tyranny. Why exactly you are so desperate to be in control of a world that looks like this one, that smells like this one, where people joke about not being able to bathe and how they stink, I stink, therefore I am, and living in this minimal supply of water. I think I'd be like, who wants to be the Lord and Master of this dung heap? Let's just turn the water back on and give up our power. And ultimately, I do see why it has a successful cult following. There's a lot of value in the movie that doesn't come together like it should. Yeah, it's kind of silly. Everything they do is on roller skates. It's like it was popular, I guess. I don't remember that being popular in 86. The earrings and all this stuff evoked our era in 86 and then projected into the future what they thought would last, what would be a lasting part of the future culture, modifying the sports. All of this, the lingo, the way they talk, the way that things are, the way the ranking system within the culture and within the police, all of this is like really overthought. It is not sort of just typical dystopianism, yet they have funny names like tutor instead of teacher and strictor instead of commander, but they spend enough time on that, giving it its own consistent terminology and then its own consistent slang in the way that they talk to indicate that it is a different era of how people interact. And we get bits and pieces of the camp, though clearly there's production ease there. The weird amusement park camp was probably made out of bits and pieces of a whole lot of movie sets that you still had around. The hanging men thing, not very amusing, almost certainly came from some background shot in Hanum High or something like that. Very realistic mannequins that drop and it looks like they're being hung. The weird, bizarre creatures that are depicted as rides or playthings, which were probably props from another film. It's as weird as it was that they were sort of vaguely trying to be Native American-ish for 1986. That's not all that weird. Finding the people living where there was the glacier underground, this divide of human civilization into these pockets as the remnants of a cataclysm that has altered the surface of the earth. All that's very well thought out and organized, even though it is late that we get Sarah Douglas's character as the director of the water treatment plant. That is very well designed. And again, I haven't checked. It might have been used in other films. And Terminac, the overthought robot, like we know more about Terminac for the 5 minutes he's in the film than anything else. And he'd have been a really cool toy had it taken off. So I can really see why, if you watched it enough times and you really absorbed the lingo, if you did the Star Trek Darmok thing where you learned to speak Tamarian, if you watched it enough and absorbed that future, there is enough there that they did a quality job of universe building, even though they threw it all at you in a way that didn't make sense and threw it at you on the screen in a way that seemed clunky. And then the way the plot doesn't quite add up at the end, all of that makes it far less of a film than it could have been. Now, as much as I dislike reboots and reimagining in this day and age, I could almost see this being one of them that was improved upon, brought back as a sequel or a reboot, because there is so much there to work with. It just didn't come together quite right. But having learned about it through a Facebook media post, I went ahead and checked it out. It's out there. It's available on Prime. If you haven't caught it, go catch it. Let me know what you think. Solarbabies.